IVM.
This is Audio Gyan, and I am your host Kedar Nimkar. Welcome to a deep dive into the minds of luminaries from the Indian creative world. Today we have Sumana Chandrashekar with us on Audio Gyan. Sumana is a Carnatic vocalist and a Ghatam player. She has studied vocal music and Ghatam under Vidushi Rupa Sridhar and Vidushi Sukanya Ramgopal. She currently works as program lead at India Foundation of the Arts. Sumana has also been part of the core team that designed the music education component of Kali Kalisu, an arts education teacher training initiative. She conducts music and sound workshops for teachers, educators, and trainee teachers. With Sumana's such diverse body of work, I thought I'll intentionally confine it to Ghatam. Today we'll try and know the brief history of the instrument Ghatam. So welcome Sumana to Audio Gyan. It's a real honor to have you on the show.
Thank you, Kedar. Thank you so much for having me here, and lovely work you've been doing with Audio Gyan.
Thank you.
Thank you for this body of knowledge that you have been bringing into the world.
Thanks. So yeah, as I said, we'll sort of try and document some bits of history of the instrument itself, and feel free to maneuver the conversation because you being the subject expert, I'm just going to nudge you with few questions which I have done from my basic sort of background and study. So I would like to start off with like a basic sort of a question to set the premise as to how did Ghatam come to be, as in like a brief history of the instrument, anything that you want to share and start off the conversation?
Yeah. So before we come to the specific instrument of the Ghatam as we know it today, we should first go back to, when humankind started. And actually the clay pot in any form, clay as something that is used in a musical instrument is really one of the first things that we started playing as humankind. So you will find that there are clay instruments, clay pot kind of instruments in musical cultures across the world. So in Asia, in Europe, in Africa, all these continents across the world, you have musical cultures that have been using the pot in some way or the other, whether it is covered, whether it has jingles on it, or it has strings attached to it. But basically, the pot has always been there. And that is quite understandable, right? In folk communities or in other kinds of societies, the clay as a material is very, one, it is very easily available. And secondly, it is the most inexpensive thing. It's something that everybody finds around them. So that's how the pot has always been a musical instrument. And when we come to India again in musical cultures across India, you will find the pot. So you have the noot in Kashmir, for instance, or you have the matka or the matki in Rajasthan. Then you have the gummat along the west coast from Goa, Maharashtra, parts of Karnataka. All these have the gummat. Then you have the Ghatam, which we are going to talk in a little detail about. Then in Haryana with the Sang Ragini and other traditions, also there is a pot that is played. So you will again find this across India, which is the most beautiful thing about this pot. And the Ghatam, as we understand it today, has a very specific connotation. Right? So this is the particular instrument that is integral to Carnatic music today. So when we are talking about the Ghatam, what we mean actually is the pot that is used in Carnatic music. So the Ghat, actually the word Ghatam is a very generic word, right? It comes from the Sanskrit word which is the pot. It literally means the clay pot. that is the Ghata. And from there we are all familiar with the Ghat in Hindi. Then, so it's the same word that has actually come, it's the Ghatam.
Okay.
And in Karnataka, sometimes we call it the Ghata, or sometimes in Tamil Nadu and Kerala, it's called the Ghatam. But basically, yes, this is the instrument that we are today playing in Carnatic music.
But like, can you share then some nuances of like what were the initial iterations, or like how did we arrive at it? Because it has a peculiar form, right? Yes, it is hollow, but it has got a peculiar form. So how did it like arrive? Were there iterations, or
Yes.
how did it evolve?
So this is an interesting question actually about the tradition of the Ghatam making itself. I would say that we haven't arrived. This is a form that is still in the process of becoming, but what it has gone through over the years is really very interesting. So in essence, in the most fundamental shape, we all know what a pot looks like, right? It's whether it's the panika matka or it's an instrument, you know that it has a basic shape of the pot. Now, however, when we are actually analyzing what these different parts might be, there are these three parts to the pot, if I can say. You have the round belly part, which holds the hollow. Then you have a small neck-like portion.
Correct.
And then you have the opening on the top. So these are the three main parts. In some pots, in some musical pots, the neck might be small, or sometimes there is no neck at all. It just has the belly, and then there is the opening on top. However, a lot
and
of...
And anything to do with the bass? The base has to be any
Not
particular
really. So
shape?
it's basically the belly is a round belly.
Oh, okay. So there
No,
is
there
no
is no,
base as
no,
such
no,
as a
no, no.
vase. It is
It's so
like the
you can't place it on the floor, then it will just roll away. So you always have the, like what the simbi that they use for keeping tablas. That's the ring we always use to support the Ghatam.
Okay.
So these are the three main parts of the pot. And like I said, there are minor variations. Sometimes the neck portion is different. Sometimes it's a little taller. It feels like it's a little stretched. Sometimes it is stout. It's more stout than the other Ghatams. But what must be taken into consideration is that the pot, of course, it has had many iterations over the years, at least over the last 100 years. The Ghatam has had several iterations. There are two main things. One is the coming of microphones into the concert space might have actually altered the way the Ghatam is made. Because then the bass sound might have been reduced a little, because anyway now we had mics to pick that sound up. You don't need that to be too loud. So then the shape of it might have been slightly changed. But I must here credit the Ghatam makers. And there are two Ghatam makers families that I'm more intimately connected with. One is the Ghatam maker Ramesh, who Ramesh and his family, who make the Mana Madurai pots, the Mana Madurai Ghatams. And there is Gopal and his family, who make the Devanhalli or the Bangalore Ghatams. So these are the two families that I am more intimately connected with, and I must credit it to the genius of these Ghatam makers. I mean, in Ramesh's case, it was his father and his grandfather. Also in Gopal's case, it was his father, who actually brought in the idea of the Shruti into the Ghatam. So when it is a water pot, you're not actually concerned about the pitch or the Shruti of the instrument. It's just a pot, and it can have any kind of sound. The sound is not of priority. And that's how it used to be played. So when actually the families of these Ghatam makers used to be players of these pots as well. In fact, they were the ones who first started using the pots in local village fairs, performances, temple performances, and so on. And they started playing the pot because they are a family of potters, and this was the instrument that they had readily available. So they would just start playing it. So I know that Ramesh often tells me that his grandfather used to play the pot, the matka, in their temple.
So sorry to interrupt, but when you said the shruti was not important, what do you mean exactly? Because I mean the pitch at the or the scale at which the vocalist is performing,
Yeah.
The ghatam may not resonate that. It would be just like some percussion sound.
Just like a general pot,
Oh, interesting.
which may not have had shruti at that time. But by and by, as it started getting more and more refined, and then they realized that, okay, this ghatam has to accompany an instrument or a vocalist, and then it has to match to their pitch. They actually started experimenting with, okay, how do I make my ghatam to a certain pitch?
Wow.
And that's I think one of the most crucial parts of ghatam making, which is something that is handed down in the families. It is part of their oral tradition and knowledge system about how to make a pot for a certain shruti, how to make a ghatam for a certain shruti. So that's what they've been doing. They've been improvising and improvising on that over the generations. And now, of course, again, the shape of the pot differs, because now we have artists who say, okay, I need a ghatam that fits into the luggage cabin of an aircraft. So how do you make the belly smaller and crunch it a little bit so that it fits snugly into that compartment? So these are different kinds. And mind you, all these also have aesthetic implications. Any kind of change in the shape of the instrument will automatically have an aesthetic musical implication. So all that has been happening. And of course, the music, the sound, the aesthetics of the ghatam is very much shaped by the ghatam players as much as it is shaped by the artists themselves. So it's really something that is going hand in hand, at least for the last 120 years.
Wow, it's so fascinating because it doesn't have those strings or anything to tune it also, right? It's just like it's
Yeah.
tuned. It's like a flute. And in fact, flute also can be slightly tuned, but it stays the way it is for pretty long time. So is it like similar case? The mud, the clay which is there, it doesn't मतलब बोलते हैं ना उतर जाता है, right? It doesn't like sort of get down or changes. Like how sturdy it remains.
So by and large, the ghatam is an all-weather instrument. Changes in air, changes in water conditions, changes in, you put it in an AC hall, you take it in a very sunny place, by and large, nothing happens to it. Of course, over the years of playing, maybe there is minor change in the pitch of the instrument, and there can be very micro shruti corrections that can be made by the use of water. So if you dampen the pot, like just give the ghatam a good bath, and the shruti will come down a little bit. Or if you want to increase the shruti a little bit, then there are other techniques. Maybe put some glue inside the neck, on the neck of the pot, like on the inside of the pot. So, but these are only micro corrections that can be made. And like you rightly pointed out, there's no way to tune the instrument as such.
Wow. On the face of it, sounds very fascinating. And you said these Ramesh and Gopal sort of just two are these like gharanas or something like that, or these are like individual?
Yeah, in a sense, you are right. Actually, they are like gharanas, because each of these families have been making ghatams at least for about 100 years now.
Oh.
Their fathers and grandfathers made these ghatams. And what is fascinating is that both the Bangalore Ghatam, which is represented by Gopal, and the Mana Madurai Ghatam, which is represented by Ramesh, both these places have only this one family that been making ghatams for the last 100 years.
That's why didn't it why, as in like across South India, you're saying?
Yeah, across South India. I'll talk about it maybe Do you want me to talk about it now, or maybe we come to it?
Yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Just to give it a flow.
Sure.
All right. So the Ghatam has been made across South India, of course. The major centers of Ghatam making in the recent decades have been Madras, that is Chennai. Then we have the Bangalore Ghatam or the Devanhalli Ghatam, and we have Manamadurai Ghatam. There used to be also these other minor centers of Ghatam making, which include Pondicherry, Tirunelveli, and some regions in Andhra Pradesh. However, as far as I know currently, most of these places do not function. So there are of the three places that I mentioned, which is Madras, Bangalore, and Manamadurai has been the one that has been flourishing at the moment. The Bangalore Ghatam is also slightly on the downside. They haven't been doing very good, but anyway, they are pulling along. I don't know about the Chennai Ghatam anymore. Last I heard was that the family has really left their business and they've moved on to do other things. But anyway, the Bangalore Ghatam and the Manamadurai Ghatam are still sort of available to us today.
And you also mentioned about, as in we spoke about this, not able to tune it, right? So is there a specific kind of clay? Because in one of your YouTube talks, I was also trying to understand there are very select places in India where you get this sort of sand, as in like this sort of clay or mud. If you can talk about that a bit.
Yeah, so one of the most important qualities for a Ghatam is that it has to have a certain ring. There has to be a certain element of a metallic content in the clay so that it can produce a musically resonant sound. Otherwise, it can have a very dull, dry sound, which is not suitable for music, right?
Maybe
So,
because of that vibration at a very particular frequency, I think is required.
yeah. And for that, we need ferrous-rich clay, which means that the clay has to be rich in iron content or metal content in general. And this kind of a clay is not available, of course, everywhere. It either has to be a riverbed or it has to be a lake bed.
And you can't mix it.
I don't think it has been mixed in the past. For instance, the Bangalore Ghatam or the Devanhalli Ghatam is made from the lake bed, from the clay taken from the lake bed, whereas the Manamadurai Ghatam is made from the riverbed, and the river Vaigai flows through that region. And actually, there are different kinds of clays that are also mixed. So it's not just one clay from one particular place only. In the case of the Manamadurai Ghatam, there are about 7-8 places where the clay comes from. So it's around a radius of about 10 kilometers. And this clay from different parts come together. They're all mixed in a certain proportion, and then they are turned on the wheel. So every kind of clay actually has a particular function in the instrument. So there's one particular clay that gives consistency. One particular clay acts as a binding agent. Another clay gives sound. Another kind of clay gives maybe the color. So each clay actually has a purpose. And something else might give a more kind of resonant quality. It's important for the tonality of the instrument. In addition to this, in Manamadurai, they also add to the clay a certain kind of metal powder mixture, which of course is a trade secret. It's made in a certain proportion, and I'm sure there's brass and copper and iron and a lot of other metal powders that are mixed in a certain proportion, and then that mixture is added to the clay. And then the ghatam is made. So actually, when we have our ghatams, we can see those very micro pieces of brass that are sometimes shining on it.
Nice, beautiful. And is there, as in, I don't know whether anybody has touched upon that aspect, that certain instruments like sitar or mainly the string instruments, the framework is set, but you are given more room to explore. With like Rudra Veena, you have this peacock where you can like explore the aesthetic part of it. But whatever my exposure has been, the Ghatam typically doesn't have any ornamentation around it. The mainly the aesthetic part. Is it conscious? Is it like, are there experiments done on that front?
Very much. Like I said, it's truly the genius of these Ghatam makers. The Manamadre Ghatam maker, Ramesh, has actually made, images of gods, images of my guru have been embossed onto the Ghatam.
Wow.
And they actually look quite beautiful. Of course, it does impact the musical aspect of it. So I don't know if many of these Ghatams are playable in the concert in that sense. But of course, I know Viku sir, I think, has actually used one of these Ghatams to play in a concert. Of course, they are playable. But you are just worried that it'll damage the ornamentation and you can't play with as much freedom. But in terms of ornamentation, there have been a lot of experiments and the makers are constantly experimenting. It's not just the artists. The makers are also doing that.
Beautiful. And how does it wear and tear? Generally, like what happens to it when it's sort of, I'm taking like a full circle before we dive into the other aspects. Yeah.
So well, to speak about it, very philosophically, it's like the human body. It can last as long as it lasts, or it can die any moment.
Wow. Because of the brittleness? Is it brittle?
Yeah, because it is as brittle as any pot is. But the Manamadurai Ghatam actually is, there are variations in these different kinds of Ghatams as well. The Devanhalli Ghatam is slightly thinner, it is lighter, and therefore the playing technique on that instrument is slightly different. Whereas the Manamadurai Ghatam is stronger, it's much heavier, and it's not as fragile as maybe the other Ghatam. But nonetheless, all these are pots at the end of the day. So even a very fine crack on the wall of the instrument can damage the instrument forever. So it could be a hairline crack, or of course we have had instances where the pot has just come out into pieces. That also has happened. And sometimes the crack can happen on the inside of the pot. Sometimes you can't even recognize why the sound has gone so bad and you are looking for it. It would have happened in between the walls of the Ghatam. So sometimes you don't even know where the problem lies. But anyway, even a small hairline crack can change the sound forever. It can damage it forever.
And then you can't recycle. You have to just as in that the mud can be sort of put in water back or...
No, that can't be done. If it's a very tiny crack, then of course we apply adhesives and try to fix it back and try to see that the sound is not seeping out of the instrument, that the sound is contained. But if it is quite a big crack, then there's no way to recycle it. At least no way to recycle it as an instrument. You can probably have other ways of using it.
Yeah.
Just use it as a water pot or something.
Yeah, I mean, because some of the videos, I think I've seen Viku Vinayakam once live. But a couple of videos and the kind of like the intensity at which it is played, it feels that it's very sturdy, but I know it's a skill. We'll come to that a bit later. Cool. So we'll change tracks a bit, Sumana. I wanted to just touch upon the other aspects of it. In fact, recently I'm trying to just follow Ashok Ranade, and he mentioned in his entomusicology talk that even instruments used to travel horizontally. I mean, there were like these upper caste Brahmin who were not comfortable playing tabla, or certain percussion instruments which had a very heavy leather usage, right? So, was there sort of any time in the history, from whatever you know, that when did this come in? or was it a lateral entry, or was it like a substitute for some animal based instrument? Any thoughts there?
So, the Ghatam, as we know it today in Carnatic music, would have a history of about 150 to 180 years. As a folk instrument, like I mentioned earlier, it's always existed. But when it came into Carnatic music, is something that it may not be a particular moment. It
Hmm.
might have happened, at different points and coming together. But broadly, from what I currently know from the little study that I have done in this area, I I feel that it's about 150 to 180 years. And of course, it did not enter on the level of the upper caste in the sense that other instruments did. The other instruments were being used by non-Brahmin, especially the skin instruments. They were being used by the musicians from the traditional music communities, which included the Devadasi communities and so on. And then it was around 1910, I think, when the first ever Brahmin Mridangam player's name got recorded.
Okay.
And around that time, Ghatam players had also started playing. There was a small number of people who had started playing the Ghatam. But in 1972, there is a lovely research that is being done by one of the greatest musicians and musicologists. His name is Rangaramanuja Iyengar. He's written quite a lot about music, and he did some kind of a census, I would say. He's also quoted in a paper that's called 100 Years of Music in Madras. So in that paper, one second, I'll just tell you the names of these authors.
Sure.
Yeah, the paper is called 100 Years of Music in Madras, a case study in secondary urbanization. And this is authored by Kathleen Lamont and Adrian Lamont. So in this paper, these authors have mentioned that in 1972, Rangaramanuja Iyengar, in his book on South Indian music, did some sort of a caste analysis. And he says that he took a sample of 10 people, 10 Ghatam players, and all of them happened to be Brahmins. Now, also, I have noticed that in my study, I have only come across, I think, Brahmins who have played this instrument, and there are multiple reasons for it. I must also say that they were mostly Brahmin men who played the instrument. So one of the reasons, even though the mridangam was already played, like I said, by 1910 we already had a person from the Brahmin community playing it. But for several years later, with the Ghatam, it remained Brahmin men. And there could be different reasons for it. One is that people who wanted to play percussion, people from upper caste who wanted to play percussion, may have been resistant to the idea of going for the mridangam altogether. Because it was, although there was a precedent, there was somebody who was already playing the instrument from the upper caste, they might not have felt encouraged to do it because it was still considered, playing on skin was still considered a taboo. It was a difficult choice for them to make. That could have been one of the reasons. The second reason could have been pure economics. Playing the mridangam or acquiring a mridangam was way too expensive than playing a ghatam.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah. And that difference in cost exists even today. So this is just a simpler, it's an easier instrument to pick up. And if you wanted to play percussion, then just simple to go and play a ghatam. Maybe that was one of the reasons why several Brahmin men took to the ghatam.
Interesting. And especially you said about men, right?
Yeah.
Would you like to touch upon, like, we see very few women sort of in percussion itself. And again, it sounds dated, but Ashok Ranade in his talk mentioned about like drums were back then was like some symbolically considered as women. It was not about the strength, or it was not about the masculine strength to play an instrument, but purely they can't play themselves, metaphorically. So any thought, like any observations there with respect to why very few women, and then with Sukanya ji and any other person before that, how did it sort of get into the women aspect?
So, yeah, what you said from Ashok Daranade's work is really interesting. And actually, if you look at folk traditions, there are exclusive percussion instruments that are played by women, or a few communities actually don't even have this difference about whether it's a man playing or a woman playing. They all just come together, and as a community, they play percussion instruments together. So the idea of percussion being synonymous with male, is a very, I would say it's a classical idea in some sense. It doesn't exist so much in folk traditions. Of course, I won't go into the nuances of, the differences that are there with the matka and the matki and all that I won't go into. But again, of course, the idea of the folk and the classical itself is problematic. I'm not even going into that. For the purpose of our conversation, I'm just making these distinctions. But yes, in classical music, it is somewhat rare, at least in Carnatic music. It's somewhat rare to find women in percussion. And even now, I think the proportion of women playing percussion is quite less compared to men playing percussion. There are various factors, and I think one of the most important factors was the nationalist movement what happened from 1928 to 1948, those 20 years that were leading up to India's independence, and the whole remaking of the classical that happened during that time has contributed immensely to this whole to the creation of this binary that women can do this and men can do this. Because one of the interesting things that I found is somebody like M.S. Subbalakshmi was actually trained not just as a singer, but of course she played the veena, but she also had training in mridangam, which means that it was not actually forbidden for women to practice percussion at all. So when did that break actually happen? And if we try and understand that, then we see, okay, these were the things that happened during the nationalist period in these 20 years between 28 and 47, 48. And that was when a whole lot of remaking of tradition, the whole definition of classical, who represents classical, how is the woman seen in the classical music. So all these things have contributed quite a bit to the way we understand percussion today.
Yeah. Sorry if I may interrupt.
Yeah.
It's I don't think so. It's just contributed. It is like whatever the antonym of contribution, because
Yeah.
I interviewed Avanti Patel recently, and she spoke about the Thumri art form being just like taken a different angle altogether because of Gandhiji's thoughts about music and
Correct.
Tagore's contribution and their worldviews of these sort of male people having an imposition on certain forms of art.
Yes.
I think that we lost like some glorious years, I think, during. Is that the correct reading?
I think that's one of the readings for sure. What happened in Khyal was very different. Although they are interlinked, I must say. What was happening in Carnatic music and Hindustani music at that time did have common points, but they also took slightly different trajectories. The process of the making of the classical took specific turns in both these cases.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah, we can double click later on that.
Yes,
But yeah.
definitely.
So yeah, talking about women, yeah, you want to continue?
So it's interesting that, you know, when I've looked at some of these temples, really ancient temples, temple architecture, and sculptures, in a lot of these sculptures or even murals, we do come across women playing percussion. So it's not like, you know, it's something that we are doing now in the 20th century and nobody did it earlier. That's not the case. We've always had women playing percussion. And all these, you know, sculptures, murals, paintings from the medieval times or even earlier, or even literature, even poetry from the 12th century and so on, is testimony for us to see that women have been playing percussion. So what has happened? Where is this black hole? You know, and why have we arrived at this point now where the proportion is really skewed? So like we just discussed, there are several factors that have contributed to it. Specifically about the Ghatam, when we look at these ancient sculptures, there are sculptures of women playing instruments that somewhat look like the Ghatam. It's not, it's really difficult to say, okay, this is exactly what it is, but there are pot-like instruments that women are shown as playing on them. However, when we come to the last 100 years, like I said, women from the traditional communities, traditional music communities, did play percussion. But then after 1920s, we see that there is a reduction in the number of women that played percussion from these traditional communities. And it was also not such a good thing for women from upper caste to be playing percussion, because that was seen as being more masculine. So women from upper caste, although they started performing music, they came up on stage and they started singing, percussion still remains sort of out of limits for them. So in a context like that, in the 1960s, then there's my guru who comes on the scene, and today she is considered India's first woman Ghatam player, and she's one of the most important, most prominent exponents of the Ghatam in the country today. So having Sukanya Ramgopal ma'am there on the scene is really, it's a milestone, I would say, not just in her own life, but in the history of percussion, in the history of Ghatam in India. Her coming on to the concert platform is a really important milestone. Of course, she's gone through her own challenges. She continues to face those challenges even now, but we are all part of this, you know, journey for the Ghatam, and yeah, it goes on.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll like just circle back on Sukanya ji and also Viku Vinayakam. But before that, one quick question is that now is it sort of still an acknowledged classical instrument, or still it's, I mean, it has got that stature of being pure classical? I mean, if we get into what is classical and non-classical, that's a different problem. But yeah, traditionally speaking.
So what is interesting about the Ghatam, which is quite unlike, I think, other instruments, is that it has always resisted any kind of labeling. So what will you call a Ghatam? I mean, it is a folk instrument. Yes. Is it a classical instrument? Yes. Is it something that's easily accessible to anybody? Yes. So it is played inside homes, it is played on the concert platform, it is played in, you just have to follow hashtag Ghatam on Instagram, and you will see today the number of people that are playing the Ghatam. And it's fascinating. Not all of them are classically trained Ghatam players, but just the fact that an artist feels like playing the Ghatam or is attracted to play the Ghatam is evidence enough that this instrument is available, accessible, and is loved by a lot of people. So, so it's actually the beauty of this instrument is that it is very fluid. It can move easily into any space. Today, you remove it from the concert space, you can still play it. I can sit on the street and play it. I can sit on a stage and play it. It is very unlike, maybe a veena or a sitar
Sarangi or
or
something.
a sarangi. There's an aura to it. I'm not saying one is good. This is not about being judgmental
Correct.
about it. I'm just saying that as an instrument, it is very fluid and flexible.
God, it's somewhat like the harmonium or the flute. They are also very fluid, right? I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
they move across genres. You'll find it in jazz festivals. You'll find it in, fusion or in classical music, in folk music. It travels everywhere.
correct.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I have so many questions, but yeah, I'm just trying to restrict myself to Ghatam. Cool. So we can conclude with one last question, which is people like Guru Sukanya ji or Viku Vinayakam and many more have made this sort of instrument really popular, right? Uh, can you sort of talk about them? What were their contribution? Uh, yeah, any milestones or like how did it got this sort of uh, uh, yeah, limelight, if I may call it?
Sure, why not?
Yeah.
Um, Talking about Viku Vinayakram sir first, I think, in one of those interviews I did with him, he had such a beautiful thing to say. He said, I just brought together the several playing styles and techniques that my predecessors were using. So, and to give an analogy, as he was speaking about this is the image I had in mind. Imagine there's a river coming down the mountain, and as it comes down, it collects everything around it and just flows down. So that is what Viku sir is to me. He brought all the techniques, all the things, there were different kinds of, so there's this 10 finger technique. There were many kinds of playings earlier. People would play with rings on their fingers. People would toss the ghatam in the air and play. There were artists who would, they were called in as like a comedian in the middle of a serious performance. You want some relief, then you'll call in a ghatam player, and the ghatam player will do some tricks on the ghatam, throwing it in the air, catching it, playing different kinds of sound, producing different kinds of sounds on the instrument. So there were artists who had already put in some kind of fingering techniques and different kinds of playing patterns on it. So what Viku sir did is he actually brought these techniques together and he gave it some form of a structure. It is also to the credit of his father, Sri Harihara Sharma sir, who I've heard was a really magnanimous teacher, and he was an incredible guru. He had a lot of ideas about structuring this material, and I think it was under his guidance that he brought all this material together, and if I can say, he actually created a language for the Ghatam. Not that the language didn't exist earlier, but he brought together this language that was scattered in lots of places, and he brought it into some form. And of course, later on, he's gone on to put the Ghatam on the global stage, which is purely, he was one of the first people to do it. And even to this day, Viku sir is credited with being the first person to go on to global platforms with the Ghatam. This really humble instrument taking on stages with Shakti and all those other bands. It was a fascinating moment for the Ghatam. And then comes his student, Sukanya Ramgopal ma'am, who is my guru. And what she has done is actually taken the work of her guru a little further. She actually brought out a book which is titled Nadam, the Viku Bani of Ghatam playing. This is, in the modern times, this is the first ever textbook for learning Ghatam. So she's brought all of Viku sir's lessons into this textbook. So anybody any student of Ghatam who wants to learn the instrument can just pick up this book, and there are very detailed fingering techniques and notations and how do you play a certain notation on the Ghatam. Everything is put in the book. That's a very important contribution she's made. The other thing is putting the Ghatam on the center stage. He is the first person who brought the Ghatam. So she plays multi Ghatams. She plays about 6 or 7 Ghatams, bringing raga onto the Ghatam and using the Ghatam as a melodic instrument, not just a percussive instrument. So she sits in the center with all these Ghatams around her, and then there are the other instruments that are accompanying the Ghatam. So she really flipped the idea that the Ghatam is only an accompanying instrument. She brought it to center stage. That is another definitive moment for the Ghatam. Also,
and sorry to interrupt here, but this is a collaboration between, say, the Ramesh ji, the Gopal ji, and then the Sukanya ma'am, or is it like because she's tuning it, or
she's not tuning it? So she's picking up Ghatams of different Shrutis and putting them together in the form of a raga.
Wow. I'm sorry, I missed it. I've never seen it, but yeah, I'll definitely check out.
I will share with you some of those links, and it's fascinating what she's done, the kind, and you will actually see that the Ghatam is actually a melodic instrument. It's no longer just a percussive instrument. And also, like I was saying earlier, it really defies this whole thing about being here or being there. The Ghatam is everything in that way. So here it becomes a melodic and a percussive instrument. So these are the main things. Also, her role and her place in the history of women and percussion in India is a really fabulous one. It is a journey that many women in this country look up to. A lot of younger women who are practicing percussion today have her journey as a model, and they look up to her as a model. She's created history with this. So as a Ghatam player and as a woman Ghatam player, on both these counts, she's had a fabulous journey, a journey that is superbly inspiring, and that will remain in history as an important moment for the Ghatam and for percussion in India.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so inspiring. In fact, I was just going to say that writing a book, Bhikkhu Bani, is itself is such a big tribute and such an important milestone to sort of the instrument itself and its journey.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think this is a good note to end. I have so many questions, but I don't know, given the time we have, and maybe I would like to have you again. We can talk further nuances of it as we go along.
Yes, absolutely.
Superb. Okay, cool. Thank you, Sumana, for giving your time, and it was really, really wonderful having you, and all sort of power and wishes to take the instrument forward as we sort of progress in our journeys.
Thank you so much, Kedar. I'm always happy to share anything about my Ghatam.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks. That's it.
Thank you.
And that's it from today's Gyan session. For show notes and more Gyan, visit audiogyan.com. And if you wish to connect with me, I am at AudioGyan Moments on Instagram. Until then, take care.
Hello! It's been a great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On This Round Is On Me, Gauri is joined by Shweta Nanda. They talk about the financial independence and how it is to be a woman entrepreneur. On Anish Thing, Anish welcomes ultra-marathon runner Shivani Gharat. Shivani shares her journey of how she ran her first marathon, the mindset of a runner, and what it actually takes to run a full marathon. On Cock and Bull, Cyrus, Naveen, Akash and Shreyas talk about the Korean band BTS serving in the military and its repercussions. On Think Fast, Varun and Suchita discuss Wing Greens and their latest acquisitions and about the Indian sexual wellness market. And on Shunyavan, Sheila Datya is joined by Dinika Bhatia, CEO and founder of Nuttigritties. They talk about coming from a business family and Dinika's journey in creating healthy and guilt-free snacking. Once again, don't forget to visit our merch store on ivmpodcasts.com. We have some exciting new merch out there for you. Also, do follow us on social media. We are IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And do remember to spread the word about these shows and any other shows you might be listening to. Appreciate them, rate them, and review them wherever you are listening to them. You can also check out all our other shows on youtube.com/IVM Podcasts. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week. Volvo XC40 Recharge, Bumble, Heads Up for Tails, Kotak Privy League Program, and HDFC Mutual Fund. Thanks guys, without you this would not be possible.
Do you often find yourself surrounded by conversations about Web3, blockchain, NFTs, DAOs? What are these terms and how do they affect our future on the internet? So many questions, but don't worry, we've got answers to all your questions. Hi, I'm Eklavya Bhattacharya, and on our show Future Proofing, we try to decode the impact of these future technologies on various industries with experts and tech enthusiasts. Tune into new episodes coming out every Thursday on the IVM Podcast app and the website, or wherever you get your podcasts from.